The air was dry and still under the twin suns that burned above the red horizon and the ground, cracked beneath every step like old parchment waiting to crumble. Daniel walked slowly across the scorched field, his boots leaving soft impressions. In the thin layer of dust, the silence around him felt too heavy, like the entire world was holding its breath, just to honor the moment he carried. A small wrapped object in his hand, and his fingers clenched it tighter as he reached the lonely mound. In the earth, the grave was marked with a flat piece of metal that had no name, only a symbol drawn with care, the same symbol she used to carve on her journals, a small spiral with wings. It had always reminded him of the way she used to dream of. Flying across stars and touching forgotten worlds, he dropped to his knees before the grave, the weight in his chest pressing harder than ever his breath. Shallow, his eyes stinging with memories, he looked at the wrapped object in his hand. It was the pendant they had shared once, a circle of clear crystal, with a single shard of blue stone floating inside. It was one of the first things she had found during their excavation. Years ago she had believed it held a secret, a connection to the past that no one yet understood, and she had worn it every day since, calling it her stark ideal. Held it up to the sunlight, and for a second, it caught the rays and sent a shimmer across the dusty grave. He placed it gently on the soil covering her body. His hand lingered there, trembling, as if waiting for something to hold him back, something to tell him she was still here. But nothing came, only the dry wind brushing past his shoulder. Like a whisper lost in time, he whispered goodbye to her, his voice rough and low, and filled with a kind of sadness that could not be measured by words. He did not cry, because he had already cried everything dry inside of him, and now he felt only that hollow space where love once burned bright, and fierce memories came uninvited like shadows flickering against the edge of his thoughts. Her laughter in the open fields, her voice echoing inside the empty caverns, her determination, even when sickness took hold of her body, she had never given up. Not until the very last breath, and even then she had asked him not to mourn, but to continue to search, to find the truth hidden beneath the ruins, to keep her work alive. He had promised her, and now that promise felt like a chain around his heart. The infection had taken her too quickly. It was not natural, not something the colony doctors could name or treat. It had started after they opened the third chamber beneath the old alien structure. The walls there were different, alive in a way too subtle for machines to detect, but Alina had noticed it first. She had said the air felt charged, the colors of the walls shifted. When you stared long enough, she believed they had found something that was never meant to be found. When she collapsed 2 days later, no one could explain why her skin turned pale blue, why her heartbeat slowed until it faded entirely, and why the machines couldn't revive her. Nothing made sense, not even the scans, not even the silence from the colony leaders, who quietly ordered the site sealed and sent warnings to all researchers to stay away from the ruins. Daniel never stopped asking questions, and that made him dangerous in their eyes. They told him to take time off to recover. They offered him a transfer. He refused everything and chose to stay close to her grave, instead working with the repair teams, just to keep his mind from breaking. As he stood up from the grave, the pendant glinting under the sunlight behind him, a small tremor passed through the ground. It was so faint he almost missed it, but he stopped and turned back toward the grave, his eyes narrowing. The soil seemed to shift, just slightly, like something beneath it was settling or moving or breathing. He stood frozen, his thoughts racing, his breath caught in his throat. He waited for another sign, but nothing came, only the wind again, softer this time, colder. He shook his head and told himself it was nothing. The ground was unstable. The whole sector had been through mild quakes for weeks. Ever since the excavation began, it meant nothing, just pressure under the surface, and nothing more. Walked away slowly, his steps slower, now not because he was afraid, but because some part of him refused to turn his back. Completely, some part of him still clung to hope, the kind of hope that hurt just by existing. The colony behind him was quiet. Most of the crew stayed indoors. Now, ever since the incident, few wanted to be reminded of the losses or the whispers that followed those who had. entered the ruins. Daniel heard them at night in his sleep, voices he could not understand echoing like distant radio waves, broken and soft. He thought he was imagining them, until others mentioned hearing them too. The colony doctors dismissed it as stress, collective trauma, nothing to be worried about. But Daniel wasn't sure anymore. Nothing felt normal since that day. Nothing felt truly alive. That night, as he sat alone near the edge of the field, watching the horizon fade from red to blue, and the stars begin to blink above, he looked back toward the burial site. It was barely visible from this distance. Just a small mound of shadow under the twin moons. He narrowed his eyes, trying to convince himself that what he saw wasn't real, because just for a second, it looked like the soil moved again, and this time it looked like something underneath. It was trying to reach the surface. He stood up slowly, every part of his body alert, his hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm he hadn't used since the war, his heart pounding not with fear, but something stranger, something like recognition. He took a step forward, then stopped again. He told himself it was the wind, the cooling air shifting the dust, the night playing tricks on tired eyes. But deep inside a voice spoke, and it sounded a lot like her voice. Not clear, not loud, but there, waiting, calling somewhere beneath the earth. The woman he loved was not done, and neither was he. The next morning came with a sky full of gray clouds, and an uneasy silence that seemed to stretch across the entire valley. Daniel woke before sunrise, his sleep broken by the same voice that had echoed through his dreams. The voice was soft but clear, like someone whispering from behind a closed door. And it spoke his name again and again, until he sat up with sweat across his back and a racing heart. He looked around the small cabin, but everything was still except for the soft hum of the power core and the blinking light of the broken terminal he had been trying to fix for days. He stepped outside and walked toward the grave again, even though his mind kept telling him there was no reason to go. Something deeper inside pulled him forward, and he followed that pull across the field where the dust clung to his boots and the air felt too cold for mourning. He stopped when the grave came into view, the same mound of red earth, the same piece of metal marking the place where she rested, but something was different this time. The ground around the grave was disturbed, not like an animal had passed through, but more like the earth itself had been lifted, and then lowered again. He moved closer and knelt down, placing his hand on the soil. It was warm, not from the sun, but from something inside. The warmth pulsed gently like a faint heartbeat. Daniel pulled his hand away and stared at the grave, unsure if he was imagining things or if something real was happening beneath the surface. He stood up slowly, looking around, but the field was empty, not a single colonist in sight, and no sign of movement, except for a few scattered dust devils in the distance. Afternoon, he went to the surveillance building near the eastern wall of the colony, where the security feeds from the outer zones were stored. He waited until the technician left for lunch, then slipped inside and pulled up the footage from the night before. He scanned the recordings from the field, watching in silence as hours passed without anything unusual. Then at exactly 3 hours past midnight, the camera shook slightly and the screen flickered for a moment. When it returned to normal, he saw something that made his blood freeze. There was a figure standing at the edge of the grave. The shape was hard to make out, but it looked human, tall, with long hair and bare feet. The figure knelt down as if touching the soil, then slowly turned its head toward the camera just for a second, and even though the image was grainy, Daniel saw something in the eyes. Something familiar and terrifying at the same time. He saved the footage on a private drive and left the room before anyone could ask questions, his mind now racing with more confusion than answers. He did not tell anyone what he saw, not even the few colonists he trusted, because deep down he knew no one would believe him, and even if they did, the colony leaders would only try to cover it up, just like they always did that night. He sat near the edge of the field again, watching the stars appear above the dark hills. The grave was still in view, though far away, and he kept his eyes fixed on it for hours, hoping or fearing that he would see the figure again. But nothing came, only the wind and the soft rumble of the night air moving across The open land then, just before he was about to return to the cabin, he heard footsteps behind him, soft, slow, and steady. He turned quickly, ready to confront whoever had approached, but what he saw made him stop completely. She was standing there covered in dust and dried earth, her clothes torn and her skin pale, but her face was the same. Her eyes wide and glowing faintly with a light that was not natural. She said nothing, only stared at him, as if waiting for him to speak. Daniel stepped forward. Slowly, not knowing if he was awake or dreaming, his voice stuck in his throat when he finally managed to whisper her name. She tilted her head slightly and blinked once as if trying to remember something. Then she turned and walked away into the dark, without a word, without a single sound. Daniel ran after her through the dry grass, his heart beating fast. But when he reached the edge of the field, there was nothing, no footprints, no sign of movement, and no figure in sight. He stood there breathing hard and staring into the shadows, wondering what was real and what was not. Next day, he went to see Marcus, the head of the science division, and the man who had overseen the excavation before it was shut down. Daniel told him about the grave, about the shifting soil, and the figure he saw on the footage, but Marcus only looked at him with tired eyes and shook his head. He said that stress could play tricks on the mind, especially for someone grieving, someone who had lost as much as Daniel had lost. But when Daniel showed him the recording, Marcus went quiet and asked him to leave the footage with him for analysis later. That evening, Daniel returned to the security building to access the footage again, but his access had been removed, and the terminal now displayed a message that the files were classified. He knew then that something was being hidden, and it only made him more determined to uncover the truth. That night he armed himself with a scanner and a portable light, and returned to the excavation site, just beyond the restricted zone. The entrance was sealed, but he found a way through the old maintenance tunnel that Elena had once used during her research. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of metal and decay. The walls of the chamber were covered in strange markings, glowing faintly like veins under skin, and the closer he walked to the center, the more the scanner began to beep with irregular signals. He stopped near the main platform, where they had found the ancient structure months ago, the same place where Elena had collapsed. He placed his hand on the stone surface and felt it pulse once, like it recognized his presence. Then from the shadows a soft voice called his name again, the same voice from his dreams, from the wind, from the grave. Turned quickly, and there she was standing just beyond the light, her body still covered in dirt, her eyes still glowing, but this time she spoke. And the sound was both hers and something else layered beneath, a second voice, deep and hollow, speaking in a language not human. Daniel stepped forward, reaching out, but she backed away and said one word in a voice filled with fear and urgency: "Leave." Then she was gone again, fading into the darkness of the ruins, and the walls around him began to hum with energy. Daniel stood there frozen, not knowing what to believe, but one thing was now certain: Elena was not dead, and whatever had brought her back was not done with her. Not yet. Daniel returned from the ruins with a mind that refused to settle. His steps were heavy and slow as he crossed the quiet colony paths, and the distant lights flickered as if disturbed by a pulse traveling beneath the ground. His thoughts raced in circles, filled with her face, her voice, her presence that felt both near and impossibly far. She was alive, and yet she was not fully herself. Something else spoke through her, something ancient and waiting and cold. But for a single moment her eyes had softened, and he had seen the woman he loved inside his cabin. He sat alone, without speaking, without moving much. The scanner lay on the table, its screen still pulsing with unread signals. The soft glow cast long shadows across the walls, and he could not stop thinking of the words she had said. That single word, leave. It had not sounded like a threat. It had sounded like a warning. The next morning the colony was filled with tension. People moved quietly and looked over their shoulders more often than before. Strange reports had started to spread of missing livestock, broken lights, power flickers, and whispers that came from vents at night. Marcus called an emergency meeting and warned the workers to stay away from the ruins, claiming there had been a spike in seismic activity and potential structural hazards. No one argued. but their faces showed fear more than trust. Daniel did not speak during the meeting. He watched Marcus carefully and saw the way the man avoided his eyes and kept a hand near his data chip, as if afraid something would be stolen. Daniel knew then that Marcus had seen more than he had admitted, and that the scientist feared something rising from the deep. Later that day, Daniel went to the outer research wing where Elena had once worked. The building was half abandoned now since the shutdown of the excavation, but her workspace had been left untouched. A fine layer of dust covered the desks, the shelves, and the scattered papers. But the scent of her still lingered, faint and buried beneath time. He sat at her station and powered up the old tablet. She always used, surprised to find it still active with a few logs left unlocked. He read her notes slowly, each word bringing her voice back into his head. She had written about the symbols in the ruins, the strange shifts in air pressure, the way the stone reacted to touch and temperature, and the strange dreams she started to have after entering the third chamber. Dreams of voices calling out names that were not human, of cities buried in light, and of a presence watching from behind the walls. Her last entry was incomplete, written in haste with trembling words. The core is not dead. It remembers. It waits. It calls to us. I feel it inside me. I am not alone. Daniel closed the tablet and looked around the silent room. The weight of her words settled deep in his chest, and something inside him shifted from fear to purpose. He would not walk away. He could not abandon her, not when she was trapped in something she did not choose. He left the research wing and returned to the place he swore to avoid, the ruins. The tunnel was darker this time. The light from his torch flickered against the walls, and the humming sound had grown louder, not a machine sound, but something older, like a heartbeat, made of stone and shadow. The air was heavy with heat and pressure, as if the entire chamber held its breath, waiting for someone to speak. As he entered the third chamber, the symbols on the walls glowed brighter, and for a moment he felt dizzy, as if the space around him was shifting. Elena stood at the center, her body still touched by soil and dust, but her face was clearer. Now her skin less pale, her voice stronger when she spoke, and though it echoed with that same dual tone, her words came faster, more human, more real. She said his name and stepped forward, her hands trembling and her eyes wide with fear and recognition. He moved toward her slowly, careful not to startle whatever part of her was watching from behind those eyes. She told him she was connected to something beneath the surface, a web of memory and thought built by the beings who once ruled this world, their minds preserved through a living network hidden in the stone and soil. And when she had touched the core, it had opened to her and pulled her in. Daniel asked if she could break free, if she could return to the way she was before. But she only shook her head and said that part of her was already gone, replaced by echoes and fragments and knowledge not meant for human minds. She said they were waking one by one across the old cities under the ground, and they would not stop until they had a body, a voice, and a will again. He reached for her, and this time she did not back away. Her hand touched his, and he felt a surge of something pass through him, a cold wave followed by a warmth so deep it brought tears to his eyes. Her voice softened then, and she whispered that she had fought them for days inside her mind, pushing their will aside, hiding her memories, keeping him safe in the quiet places of her heart. She said he had to warn the colony and destroy the core before it was too late, before the connection spread to others, before the minds within the stone found more bodies to rise and walk again. He wanted to argue, to refuse to lose her a second time, but he saw the pain in her face, the way her body trembled, the way her voice cracked as she spoke, and he knew she was telling the truth. She turned away then and stepped deeper into the chamber, her light fading into the walls as the humming sound grew louder. Daniel stood alone once more, with the taste of her words still fresh and the weight of her touch still burning in his hand. He walked out of the ruins without looking back, carrying only one thought in his heart: was alive, and she was fighting, and if there was even the smallest chance to bring her back fully, he would take it, no matter the cost, no matter the danger, no matter what waited beneath the ground. The colony was not ready for what was coming, but he would be. He had seen her eyes and heard her voice, and he would not let her be forgotten, not by them, not by time, and not by the world beneath their feet. The days that followed were heavy with tension, as if something unseen had settled across the colony, pressing down on every wall, every step, and every breath. The sky stayed clouded for hours at a time, casting long shadows over the land, and even the wind that once moved freely through the canyons now felt tight and breathless. The workers spoke less, and when they did, was in whispers filled with fear and suspicion. Daniel watched it all unfold as he moved between his duties, quietly observing, quietly planning, knowing that every moment mattered and every choice could be the one that turned everything. Had seen her again, not in dreams or illusions, but in the real cold air of the ruins, her hands shaking, her voice torn between human and other. And though he knew she was no longer the same, he also believed her soul still burned within that strange body. He believed she was still fighting from within, and if she could resist, then so could he. But he would need help, and help was hard to find in a place ruled by silence and buried truths. Daniel visited his old friend, Caleb, who worked in the outer maintenance sector. Caleb had once served with him during the colony's early construction, when survival depended on trust and strength, and he knew Caleb still carried that fire in his chest that would not let him walk away from danger when others turned their backs. Daniel told him everything. He showed him the scanner logs. He told him about the voices in the grave and the truth behind the ruins. And to his surprise, Caleb did not laugh or doubt. He simply nodded slowly and asked what needed to be done. Together, they formed a quiet plan, one that would bring them back to the core chamber, but not with weapons. Not yet. They needed to understand more, and for that, they needed her. They needed Elena, not the version controlled by the alien minds, but the real one buried deep inside that body. Daniel believed she was waiting for the right moment to break through, and he wanted to help her do it. That night, Daniel returned to the ruins again, this time alone, carrying an old comlink, modified to boost neural feedback, and a small energy stabilizer designed to sync with brainwave patterns. He had built it in secret, based on old colony research files and fragments from Alana's own notes. The idea was simple: reach her mind through the noise and find a stable signal strong enough to give her a voice of her own, even for a few seconds. Chamber greeted him with silence at first, but the air was hot and heavy, as if the walls themselves were breathing in slow pulses. The symbols glowed brighter than before, and the floor beneath his boots felt soft, like it had begun to change shape, adapting to something older and less human. He moved toward the center, calling her name softly with each step, and then she appeared again, her figure emerging from the far end of the room, her body slow, her arms folded tight across her chest, her face caught between fear and confusion. He held up the comlink and told her what it was and why he had come. She did not speak, but her eyes followed his hands carefully, and when he placed the device on the stone floor between them, she stepped closer and stood still. Daniel activated the stabilizer, and a soft hum filled the chamber. The lights flickered, the walls shimmered, and then her voice came through, not from her mouth, but from the link, small and broken like a weak signal across the stars. She said his name, and then the words, "I am here, I am still me. I can feel them. They are afraid of you. They fear what you might do, and they want me to stop you, but I will not. I am holding them back." But not for long. Daniel listened closely, every part of him focused on her voice, as she continued, "They want more bodies. They want to rise again through us, through memory, through the living. They are reaching through the soil to touch our minds, and once they touch us, we forget who we are and become something else. I can resist only because I was the first, but others will not be strong enough. We have little time." He asked how to destroy the core, how to break the connection, and she told him of a pulse buried deep within the main network, a feedback loop powerful enough to burn the entire system if it was overloaded with emotion. Human emotion, something the alien minds could not control or understand. Rage, love, sorrow, memories too powerful and raw for their balance. She said, "You must bring them what they fear most, and you must do it through me, because I am their link, their window, and their weakness. Daniel hesitated, not because he doubted her, but because he could not imagine asking her to carry that pain, to be the weapon to sacrifice herself again. She looked at him and stepped forward, placing her hand on his chest, where his heart beat fast and deep, and said, "Do not think I am afraid. I chose this when I returned. I chose this. For us and for all of them." He promised her quietly that he would find a way, that he would not let her carry this alone, and then he turned and left the ruins one last time, carrying with him a truth that burned brighter than any sun above. Back in the colony, Caleb waited with supplies and old power tools, and together they began their final task, building a small core device that could amplify human emotion into raw pulse waves based on stories, songs, recorded memories, and old transmissions. They gathered everything they could find that still carried the weight of being human, and as they worked, Daniel kept one thought close in his mind: the sound of her voice, not the one controlled by ancient minds, but the one that said, "I am still me." The night before their final step, Daniel stood once more by the grave where it all began, the soil still marked by old footsteps and a faint line in the earth where something had risen. He knelt down and spoke to her, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as someone waiting to return, and he told her he was ready. He told her that no matter what happened, she would not be alone. Far beneath the ground, the walls of the chamber pulsed with a strange new rhythm, as if something deep within had begun to fear what was coming, and Daniel was ready to bring them everything they feared. The wind howled low across the colony, as if the planet itself sensed what was about to come. The sky held no stars that night, only thick clouds pressed against the heavens like a lid shutting out the light. Daniel stood at the outer wall, wearing the old field pack across his shoulder. Inside, it was the device they had built together, he and Caleb, the emotion core that would carry the final blow. The recordings had been carefully chosen, not with weapons, not with violence, but with voices, with laughter, with heartbreak, with the kind of memories only humans could carry, and only humans could endure. Caleb stood beside him, silent and steady, his eyes fixed on the dark path that led toward the ruins. No words were needed between them, not anymore. They had already said everything that mattered in the quiet hours before the colony lights dimmed, when Daniel had told him, "If I do not come back, do not search for me." And Caleb had replied, "Then make sure you finish it before you done." They moved without noise across the field where once the grave had stood. Now only a shallow patch of earth remained, barely disturbed, but forever changed. The soil there had not moved since that night, and Daniel no longer looked for signs. He knew where she truly was, not beneath the ground, but far below it, deeper than any grave could reach. They reached the ruins just before dawn, when the light of the twin suns had yet to rise, and the air still clung to the scent of ash and stone. Daniel stepped through the tunnel for the final time, his boots tracing the path worn by memory and hope. The walls no longer shimmered, they pulsed, now glowing with slow waves of energy that seemed to listen and respond with each step. In the center chamber, the symbols had spread farther across the stone, their brightness now sharp and alive, like veins carrying the thoughts of something ancient and waking. Elena stood where he last saw her, her form steady, her eyes brighter than before, her skin no longer pale but glowing faintly with an inner fire. She turned when he entered, and a smile touched her lips. Not a full smile, but enough to let him know she was still there. He walked to her and placed the device between them. She looked down and touched it gently, as if feeling its purpose, and when her fingers brushed the surface, the room changed. The hum became a thrum, the air thickened, the symbols flared, and from the far walls, shadows began to rise, forms that were not fully human or fully alien, but something between, echoes of the minds trapped beneath the world. Voices layered into the stone itself. They moved slowly, circling the chamber, watching with eyes that held no warmth and no mercy. Daniel stood firm and lifted the control of the device, his thumb ready and his voice clear. As he spoke to her one last time, he said, "They are afraid of us. They are afraid of what we feel and what we remember. And if they fear our pain, then we give it to them, not as surrender, but as fire." She stepped forward and placed her hand on the core, and as it lit up, her body began to change. Light poured from her chest, from her arms, from her eyes, and her voice came not in words but in sound, a wave of human memory carried through raw emotion. The device captured every beat and turned it into pulse after pulse, blasting across the chamber, flooding the walls with images and echoes and sound. They heard laughter from a mother to her child, the roar of a crowd in a moment of triumph, the weeping of a man burying his brother, the whisper of lovers saying goodbye, the silence of loss, the cry of birth, the voice of hope, the scream of rage, the shout of joy. Ache of memory, all of it poured into the room and into the minds that had never known such pain or beauty or sorrow. The alien forms writhed and twisted, trying to block the wave, trying to escape. But the chamber was sealed by will and purpose. The energy rebounded again and again, and Elena stood at the center, not breaking, not faltering as the storm tore through her and around her and within her. Daniel stepped beside her and took her hand, and for a moment time froze, and there was nothing but them standing together in the heart of what once was a grave and now was a beginning. The chamber exploded, not with fire, not with debris, but with light, a pulse that shattered the old stone and sent a ripple through the entire valley. The ground above shook, the skies cracked open, and every device in the colony blinked to black. Before blinking back again, silence followed, and then slowly the wind returned, gentle, soft, as if nothing had happened at all. The colony woke to calm, the power restored, the machines reset, the people unsure of what had passed in the night. But something had changed, the tension was gone. The dreams stopped, the whispers faded, and the sky looked clearer than it had in months. Caleb waited at the wall for hours, watching the path until he saw a figure walk through the haze, one figure alone and steady. Daniel returned with tired eyes and slow steps, carrying nothing but dust on his hands and a silence deeper than before. He said only that the ruins were gone, the chambers collapsed, the path buried, and when asked about her, he looked to the horizon and answered, "She is free." He never told the full story, but sometimes late at night, he would walk to the edge of the field and stand there in the starlight, waiting without reason, and if one listened closely, they might hear a soft sound carried on the wind, like a voice singing without words, like a memory refusing to fade, because in the end she had risen not just from the dead, but from fear, from control, from silence, and Daniel had stood with her, not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as a man who remembered what love was and what it could still don't. That was what saved them. All the world beneath had returned to sleep, and the woman who had whispered goodbye once now whispered something new, something only he could hear. The end.